The ALCS and the NLCS roll on. The Astros get a win to avoid the sweep, and the Dodgers break out the big sticks and absolutely rain down runs upon the Braves. Huge game 4 now with the Dodgers and Clayton Kershaw looking for redemption. How many times has that story been out there? It feels like every time somehow Clayton Kershaw pitches in the postseason is some sort of morality play on whether or not he's ever going to be able to win a World Series title. Atlanta area sports fans are nervous. We'll get to that and discuss it as the show progresses. But I would say the biggest story that is out there by far right now is Nick Saban has tested positive for COVID, and as a result will not be able to coach against Georgia in the biggest game of the weekend in college football, with the Bulldogs rolling into Tuscaloosa. Now, this Nick Saban positive comes on the heels of 2 games so far this week in the SEC being postponed. The Florida game against LSU, which was set to take place in Gainesville, and the game between Vanderbilt and Missouri. Both of those games postponed because of too many positive tests at Vanderbilt and too many positive tests at the University of Florida. Now, the Corona Bros out there are celebrating, especially people in the media. It's really wild to me how many people in the media are obsessed with sharing every positive test as if it is in some way a massive danger. The reality is, I think, college football has gone way better than anybody who is a Corona Bro could have possibly expected when the season started. Yes, some games have been postponed. Yes, some out-of-conference games have had to be canceled. But the bigger picture here is no one has actually had to go to the hospital who is involved in summer or fall athletics for any sport based on testing positive. And even Nick Saban, who is 68 years old, and even Bobby Bowden, who is almost 91, and even Donald Trump, who is 74 years old, everybody who is of an advanced age and is testing positive in this public arena is being fine. And that's because of the overall data, which reflects that people who test positive for this virus end up being completely fine. And a huge percentage of them only know they ever test positive because they are being tested on a daily basis. Now, I keep hitting this data because I think it's significant and not enough people are otherwise talking about it, but it is incredibly important to know what the actual numbers reflect. And the fact that virtually no one is talking about this is disappointing to me. And one reason why our audience has skyrocketed is because I think there's a desperate need for honesty in a world where almost no one is honest these days, particularly in the media, and everybody's agenda-driven. I try to at least bring you basic facts. Here are the most recent data as it pertains to survival if you test positive for the coronavirus across this nation. Okay, are you ready? If you are between the ages of 0 and 19 and you test positive for the coronavirus, your recovery rate is 99.997%. Between the ages of 0 and 19 and you test positive, your recovery rate from the coronavirus is 99.997%. If you are between the ages of 20 and 49, your recovery rate is 99.98%. The vast majority of people who live in America are 50 or younger. If you are 50 or younger, your recovery rate is somewhere around 99.99%. Okay? It's almost impossible if you are under the age of 50 for you to die of the coronavirus. Remember, this is not even of the coronavirus. This is dying with the coronavirus. Okay? So if you're under the age of 50, there is almost nothing that is going to be able to cause harm to you, even if you test positive. All right? And that is the vast majority of the American population under the age of 50. But some people say, oh, what about if you're older? It's still not very deadly to you. If you are between the ages of 50 and 69 and you get the coronavirus, you have a 99.5% recovery rate. Every single person under the age of 70, 99.5% recovery rate. If you put all of those numbers together, under the age of 70, you are nearly guaranteed to be perfectly fine. Okay, what if you are over the age of 70? Even if you are over the age of 70, you have a 94.6% chance, even if you test positive, of being fine. Now, those numbers roughly reflect what happens as you age. You become more likely to have severe health consequences when you become ill. But Nick Saban himself says he feels perfectly fine. I believe we have audio of Saban saying that.
I was informed early this afternoon that I had a positive test for COVID-19 on a PCR test. At this point, I'm completely asymptomatic, feel fine. Our medical officials have told me as long as I remain asymptomatic, I will have a daily PCR testing per SEC protocol. When we're in our own personal bubble here, I think everybody's in a much safer place. I think as soon as you travel, you get exposed to a lot more things and a lot more people, if that makes any sense. Even though I've worn a mask on the sidelines, I wear a mask all the time, in the hotel, on the bus, in the plane. Nobody really knows, how this occurs. Obviously, Sark has been a head coach before, and I'm not sure exactly how this is going to play out in terms of when the game comes, whether I can have communication with people or not. So we'll have to research and sort of figure that one out. But we did have a plan for each coach on the staff as to what might happen, and we just got to go from there. Just like if we lose a player, we have to do the same thing.
All right, so that is Nick Saban addressing his health-related concerns. Not surprisingly, the Corona Bros in the sports media have immediately used this as evidence in conjunction with LSU in Florida and Missouri and Vanderbilt being postponed. They have used this as evidence for why college football isn't going to work, for why football isn't going to work, and everything else. And here is my challenge, because a lot of those people will end up listening to this, and we need to clip it and we need to share it. If you are in the sports media and you believe it is unsafe to play football this fall, I don't believe you should be able to cover Saturday and Sunday football games and tweet about them or talk about them or write about them in any way. Because if you are going to constantly lecture those of us who believe that this virus is real, but that we can't sit in our basement underneath cover, curled up in the fetal position until there's a vaccine, if you are going to lecture those of us who insist on continuing to live our lives, then you have a moral obligation to no longer cover football. Quit your jobs. If you believe that football shouldn't be played this fall, and if you're constantly going to whine and lecture everybody the minute there's a positive test, you should have the moral authority to recognize that you are a hypocrite and you can't tweet all week long every possible negative story involving college football, and then on Saturday and Sunday, tweet about games and write about games. I mean, this is infuriating to me. You can't spend Monday to Friday talking about how ridiculous it is that football is played, and then come Saturday and Sunday, you're constantly covering the games as if nothing has changed at all. The reality is you are a hypocrite. Sports is going, particularly football, far better than the Corona Bros would have ever believed. I went to a game in person on Tuesday. I'm going to another game in person on Sunday. Next week, I'm scheduled to be in Knoxville for the Tennessee-Alabama game. All of those games I will be attending. I took my family on Tuesday. I'm going to take my family on Sunday. This is going far better than the Corona Bros told you it would ever go. But it doesn't mean that when you're testing daily, you're not going to have asymptomatic cases and you're not going to have people testing positive at some points in time. This has got me fired up because the sports media, in many ways, has become the enemy of sports fans themselves. And I think much of it is political. I think sports media members have gotten totally deranged over a virus with a 99.99% recovery rate for people under the age of 50, which is the vast majority of coaches and players in this country. And even for people who are older connected with the world of sports, Bobby Bowden's about to turn 91 and beat this thing in a week. Nick Saban is 68 and doesn't even know that he has this. When in the world have we ever had a virus that people wouldn't even know they had unless they were getting tested daily? Does that sound like the world's deadliest virus to you? It's so deadly that people wouldn't even know they had it unless they were getting tested on a daily basis? The obsession with positive tests is a huge flaw for our country. Shutting down schools in any way for kindergarten all the way through grad school has been a disaster that is unsupported by the data. The tens of millions of people who have lost their jobs deserve to be able to go to work and assess risk themselves. And the Corona Bros in the media, who are constantly obsessed with sharing every single negative story, I just want to be straightforward and call them out and everything else. I'm telling you that this is a flaw and they shouldn't actually be covering sports. And literally, as I'm sitting here making this argument, I got a breaking news story from the Wall Street Journal. A decline in mammograms and other screening procedures amid the pandemic is leading to missed and delayed cancer diagnoses, data shows. You know what else? And that's awful. Do you know what else data shows? More people are dying now at a young age because of the lockdown and the shutdown than we are saving by far by any lockdown or shutdown decisions. This is infuriating. It's nonsensical. It's without logical basis in reality. Look at the data. My God, it's insane. Do you guys agree with me that it's hypocritical for all of these sports media members to be lecturing us every single time somebody tests positive and saying basically, oh, it's not safe to play college football or the NFL? And then those same people, when games happen on Saturday and Sunday, turn around and cover the sport. Look, if it's not safe to play football, why are you, who matter far less than the games themselves, why is it safe for you to travel and cover the games themselves? Don't you have a moral obligation to quit your job if you believe it's not safe and if you're going to be lecturing and haranguing everybody out there who's a sports fan and who's a football fan in particular all the time? Danny G, is that not logically consistent? If you don't think it's safe to play football and you are constantly writing those articles and constantly sending those tweets, shouldn't you then not cover the sport? Don't you have a moral obligation to actually adjust your own behavior? Shouldn't you quit your job and say, okay, I'm not going to cover football for the fall? This seems to me logically consistent if that's the position that you're going to adopt. Does it to you?
I couldn't agree more. Take one for your anti-sports team and go on layaway yourself. I knew Saban. I knew that some in the media were going to try to make Nick Saban their poster boy immediately when I saw the headline. Yeah, because he's a huge target. I think it was back in September. I saw this on Outkick, where the high school coach in Mississippi, he was actually coaching from the lift.
Yes.
I think that because Saban is fine, he should actually coach from a lift. That would be awesome.
It would be unbelievable. If the game in Tuscaloosa, if they brought in, for people who don't know, there was a Mississippi high school coach who lived next door to basically the high school football stadium. And he tested positive for COVID. He was asymptomatic. He felt fine. And so he rented a lift, and they lifted him way up into the sky so he could see into the football field. Like he was basically in a much higher press box. And then as a result, he was able to coach from that lift. It would be unbelievable if they figured out some sort of loophole like that for Nick Saban to be able to coach, because I guarantee you he's way more nervous about Steve Sarkisian coaching against Georgia than he is about the coronavirus. And I got to tell you, this is also an interesting test for those of us out there who are gamblers and have always wondered, hey, what is so-and-so coach worth on the sideline for a game? The answer seems to be right around 2.5 or 3 points. The line has moved. If you are a gambler in the Georgia at Alabama game, it's gone from about 6 to about 3.5 in terms of how many points Alabama is favored by. So in theory, Nick Saban on the sideline on a game day is worth about 2.5 points, which is quite a few points if you are familiar with the line. And yeah, look, 6 to 3.5, the numbers can vary based on what the line is, but I thought that was pretty significant. Dub, do you agree with me that all these people out there who are like, oh, it's unsafe to play football, if that's your position, then why is it safe for you to cover football? If you believe that playing football is unsafe, then why should your job, which requires you to write or talk about football, why should you be able on Saturday and Sunday to suddenly flip the script and talk about football like there's no major issue at all? Shouldn't you, from a pure logic and honesty perspective, say, you know what, I'm quitting my job for this fall. I won't accept a paycheck to write and talk about football if I'm going to constantly be lecturing people about how football isn't safe to play?
Yeah, it's totally hypocritical. I mean, you can't have it both ways if you're one of these people, because, and Danny G's idea is incredible. If Nick Saban actually does that, and I don't think that he's allowed to under protocol. I don't think if you test positive that you are allowed to be, because they had this discussion, could you be up in a press box, right, by yourself with nobody else around you? Because the idea is they don't want to set the precedent that, you could be exposed to someone else and lead to them getting the virus. So it is a really funny question and a fascinating thing to think about, because I'm sure Nick Saban is going to make all sorts of arguments like that in favor of why he could do it. But I don't think that they will let him do it, because, look, we've had a lot of coaches who had issues. If you had a heart attack or if you had, a recent surgery or something, we've had a lot of head coaches coach from the press box at some point in time, and I'm sure that's where Nick Saban would prefer to be. Joe Paterno, back in the day when he was unhealthy, he coached a lot of games from the press box. I remember Derek Dooley at the University of Tennessee when he had to have his hip surgery and he wasn't able to stand on the sideline. They had him in a wheelchair in the press box, which occasionally will happen. But I think that's already been addressed, and
Hugh
it's not
Freeze,
permitted.
who was on the show.
Hugh Freeze. Yeah. Oh yeah, Hugh Freeze, literally from a hospital bed, which is one of the craziest things that's ever existed.
In the skybox, a hospital bed in the skybox.
Yeah, in the skybox, right? Yeah, that's right.
But, yes, I'm sure Nick Saban, Dub, you're right, would love to figure out a way to do it. I don't think he can do it. But to me, the Corona Bros should not be able to coach.
I agree. And in terms of the gambling perspective, the 2.5, 3 points, whatever it is, I'm sure Nick Saban is, he's going to be coaching all week via Skype or Zoom or whatever application they're using in Tuscaloosa. So I think that's a little steep, to be honest with you.
Here's the question I have. Is there a technology that would allow him to watch the game from his house in real time, and maybe even a direct feed in-house from the University of Alabama, which might be a feed instead of watching on television, like most of us will be doing on Saturday night? If it were a feed that was, sort of the all 22 from up top that is immediately being sent to him, is it possible enough to eliminate the lag to allow him in some way to be on a headset from his house or from some other location outside of the football stadium where he can communicate with his coaches? I don't know the answer to that, but much of what a head coach does is make the big, broad, strategic decisions. You may not need to make a decision on what defense you're going to be or what offensive play you're going to run in a moment-to-moment basis. But is that permissible in some way? I think that's an interesting question. Eddie Garcia, are you with me that all the Corona bros out there who are obsessed with basically telling you over and over again, oh, it's not safe to play football, shouldn't they step up, put their money where their mouth is, and say, I'm not going to cover football for the rest of the fall, instead of lecturing all of us all week long and then showing up on Saturday or Sunday and writing and talking about the games that they're watching? Shouldn't they be consistent? If it's not safe to play football, then certainly why in the world should they be paid to cover it?
Well, yeah, it seems to me that they're promoting something that they deem dangerous.
That's right.
They're encouraging this by talking about it and writing about it and making money off of it. So, yeah, it is hypocritical. You really can't have it both ways. I did see, though, that there are NCAA rules, Clay, that will prohibit Nick Saban from doing any kind of communicating with his team from his home.
Yeah.
So it's Rule 1411B. The only communication
What's
a coach
the penalty?
can have, I don't know what the penalty is, but it says the only communication a coach can have is from the press box. He can't do anything from his home or have any kind of technology that could allow him to communicate from his home. What are they going to do, though? If he's on a cell phone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Could he call in at halftime?
You're not supposed to, at halftime, I would think certainly he could have a conversation with the coaches when they're in the locker room. You're not supposed to have like a cell phone on the sideline. I know this when I wrote one of my books on Rocky Top. I was on the sideline and I would occasionally, pull my cell phone out of my pocket and check and see what was going on. You're not supposed to have cell phones or communication devices like those on the sideline, but I don't know what the penalty actually is. So if you're Nick Saban and you make the decision to do that, what would they actually do to Alabama? Like, maybe you can look it up during one of the commercial breaks and see what sort of penalty could be levied. I don't see how they could have a significant penalty that would actually make sense in a big way.